Millions of people have fled the Muslim world in recent decades. They're escaping civil wars, religious dictatorships, and economic collapse. They cross deserts and seas under extreme conditions. And when they finally arrive, they don't reach the rich Muslim countries of the Persian Gulf, just days away. They end up in Europe, the United Kingdom, Sweden, Germany, France. They arrive in distant places that don't share their language, religion, or customs. But there, they're welcomed with hospitals, schools, and rights. Meanwhile, in countries that are geographically and culturally much closer, the doors are closed. So why don't Muslims find refuge in their own sister nations? And why does Europe, despite its colonial history, become the final refuge? This is not a coincidence. It is the symptom of a much deeper fracture, one that reveals the weaknesses of the Muslim world and the identity crisis that Europe is facing today. After the Second World War, Europe was in physical and moral ruins. Its economies had collapsed, its cities were destroyed, and its political legitimacy was damaged from within. Everything had to be rebuilt. Infrastructure, industries, and most of all, national identities marked by fascism, authoritarianism, and racism. Every nation needed labor, but they also needed to redefine who they were and who they wanted to be. That's why the arrival of millions of foreign workers was not just functional, it was symbolic. Starting in the 1950s, Turks arrived in Germany, Algerians and Moroccans in France, Pakistanis in the UK, and Surinamese in the Netherlands. And this is where something new began. Europe understood that its past mistakes couldn't be repeated and that the new generations had to build a different model based on human rights, equality, and non-discrimination. The new immigrants were not only allowed to work, but they were also allowed to stay, build families, and embrace their language, culture, and religion. This is when what we now call multiculturalism was born. It wasn't just about tolerance, it was a change of mindset. The idea that all cultures are equally valuable, and that the coexistence of many value systems in one society was not a problem, but a strength. Many intellectuals and political leaders believed Europe could build a new civilizational model, a society where identity conflicts could be solved through dialogue, and where immigrants wouldn't have to give up anything to become full citizens. Assimilation started to be seen as oppressive, and cultural mixing became a political goal. In many countries, this model became an official policy. Bilingual schools were opened, cultural subsidies were offered, and laws were changed to protect minorities. In this context, it was believed that traditional Islamic customs could live alongside the modern freedoms of the West. And so, Europe, which for centuries had been seen by much of the Muslim world as an enemy, became the main refuge for millions of Muslims fleeing chaos. Germany received more than 1 million Syrian refugees in 2015. Sweden, with just 10 million people, gave protection to nearly 200,000 people between 2014 and 2017. France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and even Eastern European countries like Romania or Croatia accepted refugee quotas through humanitarian programs. And they didn't just receive them. In Europe, a refugee can access healthcare, enroll their children in public school, learn the language for free, and get help finding a job. And in many cases, they can get permanent residency or citizenship after just a few years. The Muslim population is now around 8% of Europe's total population, and it could go over 10% in the coming years due to demographic factors like higher birth rates and the younger average age of this group. The reality is that Muslim immigrants don't come to Europe because of cultural or religious affinity. They come because Europe offers them what the rich Muslim countries can't or won't give them. But many of these immigrants don't feel like they belong in Europe. They appreciate the rights they're given, but they don't always accept the values behind them. And that's a problem, because the one who gives you refuge needs you to live by their rules. Europe believed integration was almost automatic, that giving people rights would sooner or later lead to full adaptation, that by guaranteeing healthcare, education, and jobs, newcomers would leave behind the mindset of their countries of origin. But that hope has clashed with a much more complex reality. Immigrants don't just bring their language and religion, they also bring deeply rooted social norms. Family hierarchies, collectivist structures, rigid gender roles, and a worldview that doesn't often fit with Europe's liberal, individualistic culture. They flee from the collapse of their states, but not necessarily from the ideas that helped cause that collapse. And this creates a difficult paradox, because Muslim immigrants escape the territory, but not the norms. In the outer neighborhoods of European cities like Paris, Malmö, or Berlin, real micro-communities have formed where the authority is not the police, or the mayor, or the judge, it's the imam or the unofficial tribe leader. In these areas, the national law often doesn't apply, but the unwritten rules of the group do. Community control, informal surveillance, symbolic punishment for those who break the rules, and obedience to the clan. This is nothing new. In many traditional Muslim societies, the idea of the individual is secondary to the group, and order is kept through social pressure and strict codes of conduct. When these immigrants arrive in Europe, those ways of thinking don't disappear. In some schools, Muslim girls are pressured to wear the hijab even if the law doesn't require it. In certain neighborhoods, teenage girls are punished for having boyfriends, for going out alone, or for wearing jeans to school. In many homes, the father is still seen as an unquestionable authority figure, and the family model is based on strict gender roles. Many Muslim parents don't trust the European education system, which promotes personal autonomy, critical thinking, and freedom of choice. They see it as a threat to family authority or religious values, so they remove their kids from certain classes or try to impose their own rules in public schools. Not all migrants repeat these patterns, but where they take root, integration becomes almost impossible. And while these cultural patterns aren't unique to Islam, in the context of Muslim migration, they get amplified by the clash between two very different cultural models, creating major conflicts. But the problem isn't just cultural, it's also political. Because it's not only about what immigrants bring with them, but also about what Europe is willing to demand from them. And Europe doesn't know how to respond. Afraid of being seen as Islamophobic or racist, many local authorities have adopted a policy of passive tolerance. Things that would normally be unacceptable are now allowed. Forced marriages, religious pressure on minors, or the open rejection of basic democratic norms. Multiculturalism is used as a justification, but what's being protected isn't always cultural diversity. Sometimes it's a parallel system that competes with Europe's institutional order. And this isn't just about religion, but about completely different power structures, like tribalism and family authoritarianism. These structures work because they provide safety, belonging, and meaning in unstable environments. But when they're introduced into a society built on the individual, legal contracts, and personal freedom, they cause major friction. The root of the conflict in Europe is that not everyone who flees wants to change their customs, and those offering shelter don't know how or don't dare to demand adaptation to local norms. The result is not coexistence or integration, but fragmentation that can be seen everywhere. In schools, where girls disappear from class once they reach adolescence. In neighborhoods, where police and social workers can't enter without community mediators. Or in courts, where certain crimes follow disturbing patterns. And so, Europe begins to face a question it avoided for decades. Can a democracy uphold its principles when it must coexist with cultural norms that contradict them? For years, Europe preferred to believe that integration was only a matter of time. But today, reality shows that there are practices, values, and structures that don't change, even after an entire generation. And this is affecting something much deeper, the foundations of coexistence itself. Gray areas, cultural exceptions, and legal loopholes are now accepted, and what once seemed like tolerance has, in many cases, become a form of silent surrender. Because the problem is no longer diversity, it's the lack of shared rules, and the growing feeling that democratic values are negotiable if a community is loud or sensitive enough. This erosion of state authority is creating real consequences. The law no longer applies equally in all areas. Public policies are designed out of fear of conflict, and many law-abiding citizens feel like their efforts don't matter. Many feel that European society is giving up on itself just to avoid offending others. Multiculturalism is in crisis, and the different national models show this clearly. France chose forced assimilation. Since the 1980s, it has enforced secularism as a sacred principle. No headscarves in schools, no religious symbols in public institutions, nothing that questions the supremacy of the republic. But the result hasn't been unity, it's been tension. The suburbs of Paris, Marseille, or Lyon have become hotspots of recurring violence, with constant clashes between young Muslims and law enforcement. Exclusion hasn't eliminated differences, it has made them more explosive. Germany, on the other hand, chose a labor-based model. It allowed millions of workers to enter, Turks first and later Syrians, based on their economic usefulness, but never seriously considered integrating them. For decades, it didn't even offer them language classes or citizenship. The result has been a mass of people useful to the system, but culturally and politically marginalized. And when Germany decided in 2015 to open its doors to more than 1 million refugees, that lack of preparation exploded into social tensions, mass sexual assaults, and political radicalization that cost the country years of stability. Sweden went even further, embracing extreme multiculturalism. It didn't just accept difference, it celebrated it officially. It promoted foreign language media, separate education systems, and tax and legal exemptions. But the Swedish dream also collapsed. Cities like Malmö or Stockholm now face violence levels linked to gang wars, with automatic weapons and grenades in neighborhoods controlled by ethnic clans. And the country, which used to see itself as a humanitarian refuge, has now tightened its immigration policy to levels unthinkable just a decade ago. Different models led to the same outcome: radicalization and fragmentation. Public services are collapsing in areas where the national language is no longer spoken, while civic values like equality, freedom, or religious neutrality are losing legitimacy in the face of community pressure. But perhaps the most serious problem is that many political, media, and cultural elites seem to have lost confidence in the model they once defended. They struggle to sustain it, but also hesitate to rethink it. Each new attack, each outbreak of violence, and each cultural scandal is met with empty statements, symbolic gestures, or pointless debates. But there's no clear vision for the future, and this has political consequences. Because when citizens feel the state isn't protecting their way of life, other actors appear who promise to do it. And that's when parties that used to be on the margins begin to grow. Speeches fueled by fear and frustration become stronger, and more voices call for crackdowns, border closures, and mass deportations. In almost every European country, anti-immigration parties have gone from being fringe movements to political leaders. Opposition to mass immigration is no longer just a far-right issue. It's a mainstream topic. Even moderate, liberal, and social democratic parties have hardened their positions because social pressure is intense and the political cost of avoiding the issue keeps growing. Poland and Hungary have gone even further, making migration control a core state principle. Both countries have consistently refused to accept the mandatory refugee quotas proposed by Brussels, and they've done it in the name of Christian national identity and cultural sovereignty. For these countries, accepting Muslim refugee quotas would literally mean destroying their civilization from within. The European Union, born as a supranational project, is now divided by this dilemma. And meanwhile, social protests grow, street clashes erupt, and inflammatory speeches flood social media. Europe, once defined by its openness, is now closing its doors to preserve its identity. But to fully understand this conflict, one question still remains. Why don't these immigrants choose the rich Muslim countries instead? In the heart of the Muslim world, there are countries swimming in oil, building skyscrapers and indoor ski resorts in the middle of the desert and spending billions on international sports events. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait are 4 of the richest countries on the planet. They are so close to Syria, Yemen, or Iraq that you could walk there in a few days. And yet, when those countries collapse, it's not these rich Muslim countries that open their doors to refugees. It's nations thousands of kilometers away, with no cultural or religious ties, that end up receiving the people who flee. Because the wealth of the oil monarchies is not meant to be shared. Their model is not based on cultural mixing, social mobility, or multiculturalism as a virtue. On the contrary, it depends on a strict divide between citizens and non-citizens. In some of these countries, up to 90% of the population are foreigners, but that doesn't mean they are welcome as part of the national project. They are temporary workers, with no political rights, no path to citizenship, and always living under conditional residency. They are laborers from South Asia, technicians from poorer Arab countries, Filipino nannies, Sudanese drivers, or Pakistani nurses. All of them keep the rich cities of the Persian Gulf running, but they don't belong there. There's no integration, and none is expected. Local citizenship is practically impossible to obtain. Years of work, university degrees, or fluency in the language don't guarantee anything. In some cases, even children born to immigrants don't have the right to citizenship. The line between citizen and foreigner is almost impossible to cross, because the Gulf doesn't seek diversity, it seeks control. National identity is based on tribal continuity, the preservation of a native elite, and the maintenance of an extremely fragile social balance. And that is exactly why, when a crisis hits the Muslim world, these monarchies refuse to take in refugees, because receiving them means exposing themselves. And what comes next is a very deep political problem. It's not just that they don't want them, it's that they can't risk letting them in. Because many of the refugees fleeing the Arab world are not just escaping poverty, they are escaping authoritarian regimes, sectarian conflicts, and governments that oppressed them. And on that journey, they carry with them ideas, frustrations, and political networks that are seen as explosive in the context of oil monarchies. The memory of the Arab Spring is still fresh. The popular uprisings that shook Tunisia, Egypt, Syria, Bahrain, Yemen, and Libya between 2010 and 2012 sent a clear message: order is not eternal. All it takes is an organized group, an Islamist message with social legitimacy, and a spark of injustice for even the strongest systems to begin to shake. That's why, for these governments, a refugee is not just a victim, it's also a political risk. In these countries, political Islam, whether moderate or radical, is seen as a direct threat to the power of emirs and kings. Any form of independent religious organization, any message questioning the system's legitimacy, or any group that mobilizes the marginalized is viewed as a challenge to the established order. For these regimes, Muslim immigrants are a threat. They weren't raised within the system, they don't owe loyalty to local leaders, and they're not trapped in the same patronage networks that keep the local population under control. They have less to lose, and that, for an authoritarian regime, makes them dangerous. So, while these monarchies fear that refugees could destabilize their fragile political balance, Europe receives them with rights, services, and freedom, but without asking for anything in return, without demanding real integration or clearly defending its own model. The result is a conflict that's getting harder to solve. Europe built a model to change the world, but now the world is changing Europe, and it's not clear if it will survive that change. That's all for today's video. If you liked it, don't miss the next one.